Welcome, ladies. My name is Missie Branch. I serve at Southeastern as the Assistant Dean of Students to Women and the Director of Graduate Life. It is my pleasure to host this time just on practical applications of our theology. I'm joined here with three incredible ladies. I'm sure you've heard of all of them and are excited to hear from them as I am. Joining us today, we have our own Dr. Julia Higgins. She is recently married and a dog mom to Charlie. Charlie is incredibly cute, so I always mention him. She serves here as the Assistant Professor of Ministry to Women and Assistant Dean of Graduate Program Administration. We're grateful to have her on this panel and as a part of our Southeastern family. We also have joining us Kristie Anyabwile. We're so grateful to have her here. Kristie is a pastor's wife and for over 24 years and a mom of three. Kristie has written several books. Well, you've edited a book, right, Kristie?
Right,
and
that's right. Yeah.
I have that. It's beautiful. It's called
Thank
His
you.
Testimonies, My Heritage. She has degrees in history and African American studies and is the wife of Pastor Thabiti, and their church is in DC. And then finally joining us, we have Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor, who is moving here to be a part of our Southeastern family. She is going to be our research professor of English and Christianity and culture here. And she's authored numerous books, and her writings have appeared in Christianity Today, The Washington Post, and many other places. So I'm excited to have you ladies here. On our website, we will be hosting polls and give you the opportunity to ask questions to all of our panelists. You can find that at sebts.edu/streaming. Please join us there, put in questions, and we will have polls for you to answer that we will acknowledge later on. Well, I'd like to jump right in and get started talking with you ladies. We have a lot going on in our country, and it would be crazy to not try to jump right in. So my question for you are, what are some of the triumphs and the trials that you have experienced through both COVID and the just brokenheartedness that all of us have experienced collectively as a globe?
I'm going to go first because I'm going to answer the easy, the obvious and easy. Struggles, the obvious. Everyone's struggling through COVID-19, social distancing. Some of us are struggling through isolation. Some less so. My introverted friends are like, hey, this is the life. We get to stay home and, have time to ourselves. But I think even so, we all are experiencing degrees of isolation and the loneliness that comes from that, and lack of fellowship. And I think for me, triumphs are things like, the racial climate and all the injustice that we've seen even this past month, and just culminating, I guess, a lot of things culminating this past couple of weeks has been extremely difficult. But triumphs are for me are things like the ability to connect virtually, the ability to connect with people whom I probably would not have connected with because of distance. But through COVID, we were able to invite a friend. In my Bible study last night, we were able to invite a friend who lives in Florida to join us and answer questions and talk to the ladies in my Bible study. So stuff like that, just organizing and advocating as we can in the midst of COVID. Personally, I think my biggest struggle has been anger on a lot of levels. I find myself fighting anger with, people who maybe don't have the same social distancing views that I have, and just angry because they're not doing things the way I would do things, or anger at the racial climate in the country and the injustices that we see. But through that, I think my personal triumphs have been that the Lord is helping me learn how to extend grace to people who differ from me, and to learn how to have productive conversations that are redemptive and not born out of, my tendency towards anger. So that's me.
It's helpful.
I think for me personally, one of the struggles would be My grandfather passed away on March 17th, and that was right when the stay-at-home orders were going into place for several different states. And so my family is spread out across the South, and we still have not been able to gather together as a family just to mourn his passing. And so that's, given me empathy for other people just struggling with so many ways, not being able to gather with family members or even in our churches. So I think going forward, that's going to help me in the future not take those times for granted when we really are face to face. But like Kristie said, also just the triumphs would be connecting with people that I normally, wouldn't connect with, maybe old friends or even family members. We've done Zoom calls. And so we've been creative, finding new ways to connect. So those are things to take going forward for me.
That's good. Thank you. And how about you, Dr. Pryor?
Well, for me, of course, the initial struggle was transitioning from teaching in the classroom, which I love, where I thrive, to teaching online through media like this one we're involved with right now. And I am one of the people who is really thriving and very happy just being at home. So I'm enjoying that. But part of what has been both a challenge and a gift is that that my elderly parents live here with us and I'm responsible for their care. And so that's been a blessing, a great blessing, because they're here, they're safe. I can take care of them, but it's also given me a kind of accountability that I don't think I would be cautious anyway, but now I'm extremely cautious even more because I need to protect my elderly parents and their health. And so it's giving me a kind of accountability that I'm actually thankful for as I think through, shopping and masks and socializing and not doing that. And so it's been a great blessing. But of course, and I think we'll probably talk about this more later, but just the big transition that I face in my own life. I mean, our country is in upheaval. And my own life is going through a big transition like I haven't seen in 20 years. So it's just interesting to see how God works all things together in ways that are meaningful in our own lives, even as everyone is facing these big challenges. God works through those individually in our own lives too. And it's just neat to see that, even if it is difficult.
Mm-hmm. That is so good. I'm grateful for all of your perspectives. So based on what has been your triumphs and your trials, what are the things that you're taking with you as you continue to move forward in this season? What are the things that you're learning and are using as practical tools to continue to press on?
Well, I'll start. I spent a lot of time studying the late 18th and 19th century. Of specialty in literature, and that's the period of the British abolitionists. And so one hero from that time is William Wilberforce, and he was friends with John Newton, who wrote the hymn Amazing Grace. And so the famous lines from that song, I was blind, but now I see. I feel like that is what God is offering us right now in COVID, in the death of George Floyd and so many other horrific events that are being revealed to us. I anyway, have been blind in so many ways. Add to that, it just seems like the hits keep coming because we get revelations of sexual abuse in the church coming at us too. So we have this horrific, fatal disease that is destroying the most lives of the most vulnerable. We have a system in place in this great country that is also destroying the lives of the most vulnerable. And we have in the church rampant structures that enable sexual abuse that are destroying lives of the vulnerable. And God is revealing these horrible, painful truths to us. And he's allowing us to see what has been there all along. And it is difficult, but it's also a great mercy. And so we are all left, myself included, with the decision every day, what do we do with what God is revealing to us now do we see it and how do we respond? And that's what I just keep thinking about every day as the hits keep coming.
It's powerful, the things that we can learn, even about ourselves in the midst of something that's global, right? Mm-hmm. Powerful how God can absolutely use someone else's perceived tragedy to really bring change in our own hearts. And so, thank you. Anyone else, how are you using this to move forward, a different and changed person?
I think just learning to continue to be gracious with one another as we see all of the different factors going on in our nation with COVID-19 and the racial injustices and like what Dr. Pryor was mentioning with the sexual abuse. All of these things are just such great stressors for us. And nationally, just we see that it's like we're nationally stressed out and experiencing anxiety and stress. And so as Christians, we can be leaders in exhibiting Christ-like, kindness and graciousness towards those who are anxious and stressed. So really reflecting on God's character and his kindness and graciousness towards us, and then we in turn reflecting that to others as we move forward.
That's good. Yeah. I think we all need to be reminded to be gracious, because like Kristie said before, we get caught up in our way of doing things and we forget that we all are individuals and have to process and think. How about you, Kristie?
Yeah, I think what I, said earlier about just the Lord teaching me how to be gracious, extend grace to people who differ. But I think also, as I've been struggling with sinful anger, I think the Lord is teaching me the place of righteous anger, righteous indignation. And there are things that we should be angry about. And that I need to learn how to lean into the wrongness of, injustice and things like that from a biblical perspective without allowing the righteous anger of situations to turn into personal anger against individuals. So, I think there is a balance there. And I think the range of emotions that people are feeling and that I feel, I'm allowing myself room to feel, room to lament, room to just model much and many of the Psalms that really kind of have that balance in perspective of how long, O Lord, and also yet I will trust in you. So that's kind of a tension that I'm kind of working my way through, but it's been a helpful process to this point.
That's really helpful. Just the idea of being able to honestly evaluate the motivation of our anger. And then if it's not righteous, to lay it before the Father and ask for forgiveness. But those things that are righteous, ask the Lord, how do I move forward? What do I actually do in defense of your name? So, since I have you, I would like to ask you first, your church, your family is in a space where this kind of racial tension, the people in your church would be experiencing this. So how are you shepherding your home, and how are you and your husband shepherding your church through this time? I know you mentioned that you were able to go out and protest, but how are you helping them process in their different ways?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think primarily it's been a huge blessing that the BD has, my husband, pastor of our church, he's been preaching kind of a topical series on embodiment and what it, especially he started it right at the beginning of COVID, just feeling like we needed to understand the theology of embodiment and our embodied existence and the implications that it has for us as Christians and how we live in the world. And just being separated, we really need to have those reminders. So those weekly sermons, as we've been able to virtually gather, have just been probably the primary source of shepherding. And then the conversations that flow from those sermons have been really good. So my participation in that really is talking with women after the sermons and throughout the week and just having conversations about the things that we're learning in our Sunday service. In addition to that, just continuing to shepherd the women that the Lord has placed before me in discipling and in small group, and my daughters, and just, friends online and in those spaces. I think I'm just trying to learn how to speak truthfully and also with clarity and also unapologetically. And that really is a shepherding, discipling discipline that we need to learn. And I think so many, particularly women of color, have felt voiceless, and women in general have felt voiceless and just unable to be heard. So in the opportunities that the Lord gives me, I think part of what I've been trying to do as I lead and shepherd is to model, in as much as the Lord gives me grace, truth and clarity, and just being unapologetic with the truth, but also, again, that gracious element. So those are the ways I feel like we need to learn how to have these conversations, especially now with, everybody interested and wanting to know, what do I read? Who do I listen to? How do I grow? We really need to learn how to shepherd one another through that and have productive conversations.
In this walk, in this season, there's a challenge of being bold and humble and walking through what it looks like to be bold and correct and humble and gentle and balancing all those. But another thing we have to balance is our faith and our fear. How have you been able to do that, to walk the line? Because sometimes the things that you feel like you need to say, like you said, need to be direct, can cause fear. But if you trust the Lord has given them to you to say. So how are you walking through that balance?
Me?
Yes, Kristie.
Yeah. Prayerfully. I just try to be prayerful and also have accountability.
Yes.
So like even today, there's kind of an issue that I've been rolling around in my mind and praying through and wanting to speak to in some way. So just having, sisters, friends say, hey, this is what I want to say. How is this coming across to you? Is it clear? Is it true? Is it gracious? So I think one of the ways that I kind of continue to walk in faith is having people to walk alongside me. And also places where I'm fearful. Again, I mean, that's a struggle that I have personally, just fear of man in general. So I think it's a constant battle for me. And one of the ways that I fight that is by remembering that it's not about me, that, everything that I do, I want to do in dependence upon the Lord, and that it's not me, but Him working through me. So as much as I can, stepping back out of myself and really just embracing, okay, Lord, is this something that you want me to step out in faith in? And then please give me the grace to do it and help me to depend on you for it. So those are some of the things. And I think also just as an example, sometimes you have to, many times we have to step out in faith in the midst of fear. So a quick example is my son. We went out and we had a rally or march on Sunday, and my son didn't want to go. He's 13. He's a tall African-American boy, looking very much like Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin, and he loves his red hoodie, and he's just a boy. And when we were talking about going out, he said, I don't want to go, because he was fearful of being pepper sprayed or tear gas, a lot of the things that he's seen on television. And so we prayed through it. We talked through it. I didn't push him and say, you have to go. But when the day came, he ended up going. And for him, taking that step of faith and going to the march and rally, he said that it was unlike what he had been seeing in the media. So his perspective, based on what he had seen and heard, was that all the rallies and all the protests and all the marches were just very, and there was a lot of tension and violence. And those kinds of things, and misconduct by police. And I think it just built his faith a little bit to actually take that step and then see the Lord work in the midst of it, and to kind of have his fears filtered with actual lived truth. So that's just an example of one of the ways that we've been trying to work through fear and faith.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was actually really encouraging. Please let him know that he's inspiring a lot of us with that. Absolutely.
I will do that.
Dr. Pryor, I want to transition to you. Where you are, you have been teaching, you've been serving, and I know that you have the opportunity to speak into a place that has a lot of differing views and opinions. How have you been able to, A, be bold and say what you feel like you need to say, but then also shepherd people and the students and the women that you are responsible for? How have you been able to disciple them and walk them through this season?
Yeah, I'm just finishing up my 21st year at Liberty University, and people will often ask me, what it's like at Liberty University. And I think the best answer that I can give is that I really believe Liberty University represents American evangelicalism in, kind of in total. It is all that's good, all that's bad, all that's complicated. That's kind of what we are. So I have found myself sort of at the center of a place that represents all of the tensions and questions and struggles and challenges and opportunities that we face in the evangelical church today, I think. And so it's been refining for me, because I serve in a place that does represent all of these tensions and challenges and differences, and and sort of the culmination of, I think, what evangelicalism has become in America in the modern age. So I've just simply tried to steward that place well that God put me in, being faithful to my convictions, and all of the history that I bring to this place, which includes, a very theologically conservative background and continuing convictions in that way, but also someone who has had my eyes opened about the injustices in the church and in America, and who was trained on the training grounds of the early modern pro-life movement. And so my passion for justice and activism was birthed there and is flourishing in these times. So all of these different factors and strains I bring with me, but want to bring to this diverse audience within the church, which has been politicized and polarized and malformed by media and pragmatic philosophy and consumerism and so many other things. And so, so I simply try to provide a space in my classroom and in my social media. I'm very active on social media, where I bring things that represent my convictions, but cultivate healthy conversation and challenge and dialogue and discussion, because I think that's really what the church needs. We are so divided and polarized and politicized that we often can't even see past these received sources of wisdom and cliches and memes and sound bites to what's really happening around us. I love the story you told about your son, Kristie. That is so powerful, and one I'll be thinking about, because it's a great metaphor for all of us, because what we actually see and live and experience can oftentimes get diluted by the projection that we see on the screens and in social media, such that we can no longer distinguish fact from fiction and truth from distortion. That's where we are. And so I think that is actually, I know that's my calling. And I think there are many more of us who can answer this call to simply sort through, filter through the distortions, be a voice of truth, but also of grace, and encourage one another to listen to one another, and seek the truth, seek the truth beneath all the distortions and the chaos that we're encountering every day. We're almost in a new dark ages, not because of the lack of information, but because we have so much information we don't know which is true and accurate. And so it's a very odd place that I feel like I find myself in the second half of my life.
Well, it's so true that we hear voices from so many different spaces, from our social media, from our families, from our churches, that it's hard to differentiate what's actually true. And then our own experience speaks into that. Dr. Pryor, what would you recommend women be reading in a season like this for both their own spiritual growth, but also for the ability to have eyes that look outward?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the minor prophets of the Old Testament are a perfect place for us to be reading in God's Word. At this time, I just got done teaching a course, Literature of the Bible, where we went through all of the books of the Bible. But this semester, at this time, when we were studying the minor prophets, it was as though those books were written and God gave us those prophets for these days. And then beyond those books in the Bible, and any books in the Bible, of course, are good. I think that I think there are. I mean, my area is literature, and so for me, I want to turn to kind of the things that go beyond our moment right now, the things that remind us that what we're experiencing right now is strange and odd, but the human condition has never changed. And there have been communities of people throughout all of human history who have faced things like this and worse things. So any works that remind us that there have been plagues before, there has been persecution before, Christians have persecuted one another, those kinds of works, whether they're fiction or historical works, can give us the broader perspective to help us navigate these times.
I agree. Thank you for that. I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that has been encouraging for me personally has been reading autobiographies, because they have allowed me to, exactly like you said, see that people have endured hardship. People have been able to glorify the Lord through hardship, and we have seen God deliver people from hardship. And so I agree wholeheartedly. Dr. Higgins, I want to get a chance to ask you some questions. I know discipleship is very important for you. Can discipleship actually happen virtually? We've been in this space where everything has been through Zoom. Have you seen it happen and be effective virtually?
Yeah, I would say definitely it can take place virtually. I would say that emphatically. If we look at discipleship, we think about the definition of discipleship, basically following after along another Christian who's just further along than us, learning from them and growing in Christ likeness. We can do that virtually by meeting through Zoom. We can learn from someone who's further along than us in the faith. I think that the key takeaway would be for the disciple maker to make sure that they are incorporating active learning. So it's better to have a conversation like we're having right now, where you incorporate ideas, you talk through those critically, maybe even for the disciple maker, thinking through ways that they can cause what educators call cognitive dissonance, where there's just that confusion for the learner and they're forced to grapple with concepts. And so if you can do that through virtual spaces, then definitely someone can grow in their Christ likeness through something as simple as using Zoom. So yeah, I've seen that take place more formally as I've been meeting with students. Early on during the stay-at-home order, we had our faculty just call, all of our faculty were reaching out to those students who were under us as we were their advisors. And so we would call and reach out and meet with them through Zoom meetings and just having those in-depth conversations. I think about two young women who are serving up in the Northeast and the struggles they were having as they were seeking to disciple others. Just talking through those conversations in depth with them. So I know that their discipleship formally was taking place. And then even in meeting in a virtual classroom, like yesterday, I met with students. I'm teaching an online class this summer, and we've added Zoom to our online component where I'd never done that before. but I've, now requiring a Zoom meeting where we all come together. And so putting them in breakout groups, giving assignments within the Zoom session where they're entering into that active learning with one another can grow them also spiritually and mature them academically as well.
That's helpful. Yeah, I've had the opportunity to do some discipleship and receive discipleship via Zoom, and it's been beautiful. So I agree with you. How have you been able to use what you know about discipleship and use your platform to disciple women in your community in the midst of what we see has been a heartbreak over the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, and just discipling them, because that'd be a different community than maybe Kristie's and Dr. Pryor's? How are you able to disciple the women in your area of influence through this incredibly difficult season as they grapple with different frameworks and beliefs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those in my direct influence would be students that I'm interacting with at Southeastern. And so I think when I'm meeting with them through Zoom and interacting with them, I'm hopefully pushing them to consider, first of all, the command to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with their God. And so those three concepts, really, I think we can't even begin to do those things. We can't follow that command unless we first reflect on God and his justice and how he accomplished justice for himself by sending his son. So in mercy, he sent Jesus, and he accomplished justice in doing that. So we see the example of how to do justice through looking at God and how he accomplishes justice. And then he weds that with mercy. And so the end of that verse, walking humbly with our God, I think all three of those things, I would push students to think through God's character of justice and mercy and walking humbly with him. And so encouraging them to be humble as they interact with others who are different from them, sitting back and taking a position of listening, particularly from white brothers and sisters, us sitting back and listening and being humble and being willing to hear from those who have a different experience than we do, and not reacting in pride and just saying, well, that can't be true because that's not my experience. Mm-hmm. But sitting back and being humble and reflecting on God's character and helping them to lead in their response in that way.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You ladies are blessing us. Ladies joining us, we're going to take a brief minute to let you view some information. If any of you are interested in pursuing education here at Southeastern, it is a beautiful time to be a woman and a student at Southeastern. Please watch this, and then we'll return in a few minutes to ask questions of these panelists. I'll be taking some of the questions that you have been putting in on the Slido. So once again, go to sebts.edu/streaming and put in your questions. Thank you.
We believe that we do a better job of instructing and preparing our students because we do it under the umbrella of the final marching orders of the Lord Jesus.
We want this to be academically rigorous, but we also want this to be a fruitful enterprise for your soul.
A theological mind is being cultivated in me that I might serve the church and participate in God's mission in the world.
At Southeastern, there's a tremendous culture of mentorship between the professors and the students. They see it as, here are a group of people that God has graced me with. How can I love them and get them closer to where God desires for them to be?
My desire is that God would use us to raise up men and women who would so walk with God, so know God's word, so be committed to the work of the Great Commission that hell shakes because our students exist.
Welcome back, ladies. I'm glad to be here with you. I'm learning a lot along with you. Ladies on the panel, our ladies in the audience have been being polled throughout this, and I would like to ask you some of the questions that we've been receiving. Most of you at home answered the question, what biblical figure would you like to have coffee with? And it can't be Jesus. So we're going to take him off the table. So I'm curious, who would you say? Who would be your choice? Anybody? Any one of you ladies?
I would say Anna, the prophetess that's mentioned in Luke. So she's there. She's a single woman that's been single, like she was married for 7 years, I believe the scripture says, and then she's single up to the time maybe of 84. And I identify with that. I've married later in life. And so just wondering what that was like as a single woman to serve at the temple and then to see the coming of the Lord Jesus as a baby. So I think it'd be, awesome to sit down with her.
I think I would, I most look forward to spending time with John. He is such a poetic and powerful writer. The Gospel of John is just so evocative and beautiful. Yeah, I think he'd be fun to just sit around and listen to.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
I've been studying through Esther with a couple of ladies this spring and through COVID. And I would love to have coffee with her and just ask her questions about what it was like to put her life on the line in the way that she did, and to speak truth to power, and to call out real injustice, and then the boldness that it took for her to go before the king, but then also to lay the burdens of her people before him. And I just would love to have conversation and coffee with her about that experience, and then what it was like afterwards to really see God come to the aid of her people. And so that would be my person I'd love to sit down with.
That's awesome. I think it would be hard for me to narrow it down to one person, but I think we're reading a book here, a group of us, called Worthy, and I've learned a lot about Eve, a lot about her as a human, embodied. I think Pastor Tafiti would appreciate that, and so I would love to get to spend time with Eve and just be able to communicate with her, probably some apologies, but then also just wonder what it would be like to have been in her position and, still had to keep walking through. There's a level of endurance required for that. So, well, ladies on the panel, we've received some incredible questions. So I want to start asking them. I'm asking them in general, but so please feel free to jump in and answer. But if someone doesn't answer, I'm going to point to somebody so that we can get through these ladies' questions. So the first one is, what accountability boundaries or habits do you have in your life that you have clung to during this time to keep sane? I'll allow you a second to think. So that's what accountability boundaries or habits do you have in your life that you have clung to during this time to keep you sane? I personally, I was taught a long time ago that you should be praying without ceasing. That's something my mother has always said. She prays all the time. She is a prayer warrior, and so I was taught, I have learned to pray when I'm doing things I don't like. And so it's the habit of mine to pray during dishes and pray during folding laundry. And so for me, I have spent a lot of time in prayer, praying during certain emotional moments, praying when I hear people saying certain things. And so prayer has been my thing, actually, to hold on to. So I don't know. Kristie, do you have something?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that initially came to mind. One is I've actually found there are a couple of communities online, Facebook in particular, that have been such a source of encouragement, and I don't know if it's necessarily accountability, but for sure encouragement. And where if I'm struggling in particular ways or have a question or need prayer about things that are kind of more global, for lack of a better word, and perspective, broad in perspective. There are women that I go to there that have been a source of encouragement. Another one is just with family and friends. I kind of give myself a 10-minute limit on Twitter. 10 minutes in terms of consuming negative, unhealthy content. on Twitter. So I have my family and friends, they kind of hold me accountable to that. And I just think in general, consuming less media, more word, more music, more time with family, God in his grace, as much as we mourn and grieve all the sickness and death as a result of COVID, he's also given us time, extended time with family and loved ones. And so I think for me, that's another part of just staying sane is, playing speed Scrabble with my kids or what is that other game? Dutch Blitz or something like that. And, and just enjoying the gift of having my family, my children home. And then the perspective of knowing that all that we experience in this life is temporary, and that trouble won't last always, as the old folks used to say. Mm-hmm. And just kind of having a more eternal perspective, rather than continuing to allow myself to spiral down into whatever the goings on are, in our day. So those are a couple of things.
That's helpful. I'm going to pose this next question to you, Dr. Higgins. The question is, can you talk about how seminary training for women helps the local church?
Sure. That's a great question. And I think that, as women come to seminary, they're going to learn things in a formal way that maybe the local church is not providing opportunities for women to learn. They're going to sit in on classes like Old Testament, New Testament survey, of course, where they're going to grow in Bible knowledge. They're going to sit in on classes like Greek 1 or Hebrew. They're going to take the languages. If they're in a certain degree program, they'll be learning deeply of how to interact with God's word in the original languages. And also they'll be equipped to take a text and exegete it properly and teach it. And I think that that's needful for us, especially in women's ministry programs in the local church, of raising up female leaders who are taught how to study the scriptures and then draw out the meaning from the text and exegete it well and teach it to others. So I think that those would be the main ways. Also, we have several different, counseling courses and degrees that equip men and women alike to counsel. And so I know that's a deep need in ministry, is learning how to be faithful with the scriptures and teach others in a way that counsels them in the word. So all of those elements are just things that you don't necessarily get in the local church discipleship process. And the seminary comes alongside of the church, and we exist to equip those students to go and serve the church. And so once the female students come and learn those things, then they can go out and disciple others in their local churches and bring others into maturity in the Lord.
That's beautiful. I mean, I'm grateful for the theological training I'm receiving, and I love the many different experiences that women have after they graduate from here and all of the ways that they've been called to serve. It's been beautiful. The next question I'm going to pose to you, Dr. Pryor, which is, how do you balance an emotional response to situations at hand while living and communicating truth to yourself and those around you?
Wow, it is all about balance, isn't it? It's balancing emotions and reason, faith and fear, as we've talked about. I do, having written a book that that centers on virtue, on reading well, I do believe, and as I write about here, that virtue, which is really about balancing and moderating competing tensions and ideas, is a practice. It's a habit. It's intentional. It's not accidental. And so we really do have to be mindful of the tensions that we are facing, whether, so for example, I think we're all navigating the virtue, we're trying to navigate with the virtue of courage right now. What does it mean to be courageous? And being courageous is not just simply being bold, but it also means that you can't be reckless either. And so it's so easy to err in one direction. So for me, because I tend to, thinking is my love language. And so I just like to think about things. I do feel feel that knowledge does help us to act wisely, so that if we understand that what courage is, its definition, and what it avoids as well as what it preserves, then that can actually help us decide what the courageous thing to do is, whether we're talking about masks or whether we're talking about, standing up for injustice and those who have been oppressed. And so, again, for me personally, I think about these things and try to think before I act. And then it does become a practice. It does become a behavior. It becomes easier to do after time. And sadly, I have had a lot of practice responding on Twitter because I spend too much time there. But people will often comment about how my responses there are can be edifying or exemplary. And it's something that I have intentionally practiced. And so I say that as an encouragement, that we can learn to be better, to be more virtuous through practice.
Kristie, I'm going to pose this quick question to you. What encouragement do you have for church leaders to serve their sisters in this season?
That is a really good question. I think, leaders have to do what they're called to do. I mean, they have to lead and lead, following the example of Jesus by serving. And I think in this time, well, I'll just speak from our context. We have a lot of young women, a lot of young single women. We have a lot of college students. And so I think leaders need to check in on them, specifically sisters of color right now. Don't assume how they're feeling, and just ask, pray fervently for them, and let them know specifically how you're praying for them. Ask how you might be able to, in what ways, you can serve them. And I think also leaders, particularly pastors, for example, in preaching and in shepherding, I think as they bring application of the word to bear on the lives of people in church, to not forget the sisters and to be mindful of, the struggles and the needs that they have. And part of that, too, in being an excellent leader is really reading good material that is written by women, and even material that's written, quote unquote, for women. One of the things that I have been so blessed by in our church is that all of our pastors take a keen interest in the women of our church. They are not behind the scenes when it comes to hearing what's going on in the lives of the women. They are very forward thinking and leading in our kind of Titus 2 model. So they invest in the older women of our church, and they read books with us. So we've read everything from Gloria Furman to Jackie Hill Perry to Kathleen Nilsson to we're about to read Worthy, and things like that. And so I think another way that leaders can serve sisters, male leaders in particular, is by learning from women and seeing how that might translate into how they shepherd women in their churches. For women leaders, I think one of the things that we can do as leaders is, again, we need to be checking in on our sisters. There are some deep struggles that happen in the normal course of life that are just intensified in this season of social distancing and isolation. So we need to be asking hard questions of the women who are in our churches and not make any assumptions about how godly we think they are or how, sinless we think their lives are. None of us are there. None of us have arrived. All of us struggle. And as leaders, we need to be able to, and willing to press into some really difficult, hard questions and check in on our sisters and plead with them for vulnerability and honesty. And as leaders, we need to be that way too. We need to be vulnerable ourselves, open our lives up to the women we lead, and let them know that their lives and their stories are safe with us, and that we're here to minister with them and to walk alongside them. One other quick encouragement is just to encourage women to rest. And I think, depending on phase and stage of life, it's just really hard to kick back and to rest in the Lord and to rest physically. And I think that's a discipline that's really lost on us today. And in this time when life is a little bit slower in some ways, I think as leaders, we need to encourage our sisters to rest. So those are a few things I can think of.
So helpful. Thank you for that. I'm really impressed with the way the men at your church do lead and serve the women there, and it's really beautiful. I have another question, and this will be open for the three of you to jump in. What are some ways to best help and encourage church leadership to be more passionate about engaging in issues of justice? All of you are women who would naturally have a voice in the ears of pastors, obviously, because you are leaders. But if I'm not necessarily a leader, but I'm passionate about something in particular, how would a lay person, a woman or male, actually encourage church leaders to be more passionate? There are churches, obviously, that have particular things that they forward, but some churches may not really even know that the people in their church are passionate about it. So how would you encourage them?
Well, I'll share just sort of a specific concrete example from my life now. I don't think there's anyone in the church who finds themselves in more complicated, tension-filled spaces than pastors who are ministering to usually congregations that are filled with people who are on different sides of different issues and political parties and whatnot. I mean, most churches are pretty diverse in a variety of ways, if not in all ways. And I know the pastors, because I know mine has been, are encouraged when the people they minister to can set an example for how to approach issues. Probably pastors, my guess is they often hear from people who are, angry about on one side or the other, or passionate about, just one aspect of something, and then the opposite aspect comes from another corner. But when they can see people model compassionate, gracious approaches to issues, it gives them hope. And it also, I think, helps them see a way forward, because oftentimes pastors are just kind of stuck in a darned if they do and darned if they don't, speak up about an issue or do something about an issue. And when they see their members kind of navigating those waters in a gracious, truthful way, that can give them courage. So we can minister to them, I guess, but just by modeling what we want to see them do.
That's beautiful. Thank you. One of the thoughts that I was having in this season is that we are all feeling the collective grief of the loss of life. But what is true about our society is that this is trending now, and then it moves on. And then while a family may be grieving, we've moved on to the very next thing. So a question that we received, which I think is a good one, is how do we stay active against injustice and stay vigilant against things that are important to protect ourselves from, that are not just in the forefront? Like, we don't allow it to just escape our minds because it's not trending right now. Dr. Higgins, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it would go back to entering into relationship with others not like us. And so once we are in relationship, once we are building friendships with one another, then whether or not it's trending, like I'm automatically, Missy, I'm going to be thinking about your children, your sons, as they go out, and what that experience might be like for them going forward months from now, because you and I are friends and I care about you and your family. I've become friends with you. And so it becomes even more meaningful. So I think that as we continue to make sure that we're intentional about developing relationships with one another. That's going to increase our care and our concern for justice to not just be something on the back burner, but something that we pursue for one another.
That's very helpful. I agree. I would agree wholeheartedly that who you know will always affect what you think, right? And so how we spend our time with people obviously gives us a broader perspective. Another question, we only have time for a few more, so I'm trying to get through them. Another question is, how would you encourage a woman in leadership to use her voice humbly amongst a predominantly male leadership environment? I'm thinking, Dr. Pryor, you may have some experience with this, but any of you are welcome to answer.
I have often in my life been the only female leader in a room or in an event. That's changing, thank goodness. I'm grateful to have a lot more company these days. I guess I'm tripped up a little bit by the humbly part of it, because hopefully we're all being humble, and I don't think that women need to be any more humble than men. We all need to be humble. So, but if we think that, I think it's more a matter of earning respect. And so there are lots of ways that we can earn respect. It's not a one size fits all. And I think if we earn respect and gain knowledge and authority in what we bring to the table, then that naturally makes some room for us. And so I think women need. I don't think humility is a problem for women speaking up among men. So, but let's all be humble. But also, we need to understand that men are where they are because they have had access to more education, more knowledge, more experience, and more authority. And so we need to pursue those things intentionally so that we can bring the same to the table.
Excellent. Well, I think we have time for maybe one more. Kristie, you mentioned the need to check on people and the need to make sure that we are seeking out ways to find rest. This question is for you, Kristie, or for all of you. What are ways that you find rest in great seasons, in seasons of great busyness? But right now we may not even be very busy, but we all may be dealing with anxiety and fear. What are the ways that you find rest in these seasons?
That's a good question. Yeah, I've just found it strange in this season where I'm not running back and forth to, drop my son off at school or to pick him up or to go to an activity. And like a lot of my daily life, things that I would normally be doing in this season, I'm not doing, but I find myself so exhausted and just tired, and I need rest. And it feels weird to me. I'm like, why am I so tired when I'm mostly home and, in front of, in front of a computer screen or those kinds of things. And I think I devalued the physical toll that mental exertion has on an individual. I go. I'm that kind of person. So I understand I should be tired if I've been going all day. But I think I didn't understand how that same kind of exhaustion can occur just from being engaged in this virtual kind of existence as well, on top of all of the stressors that have come to us these past months with COVID-19 and the justice issues and those kinds of things. So for me, finding rest has meant, again, stepping back from a lot of the virtual experience, from social media, those kinds of things. This summer, as a matter of fact, this week is basically my last week of, kind of my normal ministry activities. So I'm taking the summer off and, planning for the fall and, just resting physically. reading big long books that I never have time to read. Slowly, very, very slowly making my way through my son's Aragon series. I'm on the last one. So my family, a lot of times, in a busy day or just a hard day, or just I can't take it anymore day, I'll just say to him, hey, I'm going to Allegasia. Allegasia, for the Aragon fans, is the fictional, area in which the story takes place. So I'll escape to a good book, fiction or even nonfiction, and again, just going on long walks, praying, Marco Poloing with friends, or just listening to podcasts, doing things that are relaxing, going walks by myself with my husband, exercising, yoga, those kinds of things. Just I've done things like I've picked up crocheting again, which I haven't done in a whole lot of years. So learning how to do granny squares again, and baking, just mindless things. There's thousands and thousands, hundreds of things that we could think of to do to rest. But I think anything that gets us away from the screens, gets us away from a lot of media, has us connecting more personally with family, or just doing things that bring us internal joy and peace, taking long baths, those kinds of things. And just the spending extended time in the Word and diving deep into questions that I have that, I just want to chase down sometimes in the scriptures. And just spending time with the Lord in those kinds of ways have been lots of ways that I've just found to rest in this season. Yeah.
Ladies, our time has flown by. I'm so grateful for that, for the reminder that we need to rest and that we can be diligent to seek it out. I am grateful for all of you and your wisdom. Unfortunately, we have to close. There were a lot more questions, and one of them online was about a reading list for women who are not necessarily able to go to seminary. So I will be reaching out to you ladies to put together a reading list that we will put on our website. Ladies in the audience will tweet it out. We'll put it on Instagram. We'll do what we got to do to get you a reading list. I want to thank you all for your wisdom. I want to thank you all for your time. And ladies in the audience, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I pray this was as a blessing to you as it has been for me. Thank you so much. Have a great day.